Today's video is brought to us by the generosity of Firearms Legal Protection. Firearms Legal Protection is a legal defense program for lawful gun owners. You win the fight, and they will help you win the fight after the fight for the rest of your life. There's a link in the description for a coupon code for a discount for all active self-protection watchers. Marc, again, appreciate you being here. Of course, you've watched the video. This is a 4-year-old who is an attempted stranger abduction in California, and thankfully, this little girl was able to wiggle out of his grasp, and then some bystanders kind of chased him down, and then the cops took him into custody a little ways down the street. I want to talk about being one of those bystanders. You see this go down, and I think our culture today is very worried about liability in terms of acting as a bystander. But do things like Good Samaritan laws cover me if I act in good faith in these kind of instances?
Well, let's start from the beginning. First of all, we have to make a distinction, as we should always, between the legal world and the moral world. Very important distinction. As a legal matter, you absolutely have no obligation to get involved.
Okay.
No matter how egregious the situation is, no matter how horrible it is, no matter the fact that you're the only one who can help and this and that, you can walk right by. The law does not impose a duty for you to get involved unless you have a special relationship with the person.
Okay.
Like maybe you're the parent and this is a child, you're a guardian or something like that, or you've put the person in some position, right? If I knock somebody in a pool and they can't swim and they're going to drown, I got the obligation to save them.
Because I caused the issue.
Because I caused it. But if somebody's just drowning in the pool, I could walk by and say, oh look, somebody drowning in the pool, I'm a lifeguard, but I'm not on duty. I'm just going to move on. I don't want to get involved. That's a hugely moral failure in my view, but it's not a legal failure.
There's an important distinction. You may not have a legal obligation, but you may have a moral obligation.
In my view, you clearly have a moral obligation, but that's just my particular opinion. The point I'm making here is you do not have a legal obligation to get involved unless you caused the situation or you had a special relationship with the person who is in need to begin with.
Okay.
So, but if you choose to get involved, yes, you got to act reasonably. If you get involved and then you act unreasonably or you do something wrong, of course you could be subject to civil liability. That's a risk you take. Some states have Good Samaritan laws that will protect you if you get involved. Some don't. The contours can be different. This is really a civil type of a question. It's not something I generally get involved in. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to get involved. I'm going to take the risk and get involved in a circumstance like that because I'm not going to let some kid get abducted, period. And I know you're going to get involved.
Yeah,
but if you do get involved, you're going to take on some risk. That's just life in the big city.
So, and then sometimes, of course, you worry about, hey, wait a minute, what I thought was a stranger abduction ends up being a custody dispute. And if I do have a custody problem and I'm factually wrong, then I could have some liability here, but as long as I act reasonably, I should be okay.
It depends.
Lawyer speak, here it came.
It depends on what's going on.
Yeah.
We can imagine the guy that grabbed the kid is the undercover police officer who had some kind of, he was returning the kid to the rightful parent and blah, blah, blah. And you interfered, so you punched the guy who you thought was the abductor in the face, and the kid somehow goes back to mommy, and mommy takes off down the road, and you just interfered with a police officer trying to validly seize a kid who was abducted.
So, but if I didn't know he was a police officer and I reasonably perceived that he was a kidnapper, and so then I acted on that reasonable perception, I would think that I shouldn't be prosecuted in that issue.
Well, let's talk about competing rules in different states. Some states have a rule, and you'll think at first blush this is a very reasonable rule. The rule is, look, you can defend a third party. You can assert the rights of a third party. You stand in their shoes when you do such a thing.
Ooh, the alter ego rule, right? That you stand in their shoes.
But it sort of makes sense, right? If they can defend themselves, then you can stand in their shoes and you can defend them to the extent that they can defend themselves. This sounds very reasonable. But in a case where you made the mistake and they had no right to defend themselves, let's take a situation, let's take it a little bit out of this video and just say, this example I like to use to highlight this point is you're jogging in the park one morning and you see a woman jogging in the park and she says hi, you say hi, and the next thing you look back and she's screaming and there's a disheveled looking troublemaker type guy jump out of the bushes and grab her. and you rush back and you punch the guy in the face and she takes off. And then the guy says, I had an arrest warrant for her.
Right.
And she had no right to defend her. She had no legal right to defend herself. So in a state where you stand in her shoes,
You had no right to defend her.
you made a big mistake.
Yeah.
Arizona follows the minority rule, which is if you make a reasonable mistake of fact, you could even argue potentially an unreasonable mistake of fact, that'll save you. Now, not all states agree on this point. And so you really got to look at some of the finer points of your state statutes. Now, I will say this, prosecutors have discretion. And in the circumstance where somebody really legitimately acted out of a good faith motivation
Right.
to help a person, even if they screwed it up, right? It was an oops, I didn't realize you were an officer making an arrest, and this person was some horrible criminal who now got away. My guess is most prosecutors are going to say, we're going to give the person a pass on that one.
And that's why we're grateful for prosecutorial discretion. Because there are some times where you have to have common sense and say, that's not what the intent is here.
Look, you can't have a free society without the role of the prosecutor. You need the role of the defense attorney and the role of the cop, right? In theory, they all need to be acting appropriately to have a civilized, organized, free society. What we want, because we can't have a rule for every possible situation, we want prosecutors exercising some discretion.
Sure.
We want them using their brains and saying, okay, did this guy technically violate the law? Maybe he did. But you know what? We're not going to prosecute him for it because it's the right thing to do in this circumstance. Now, in the case where a prosecutor does, because some of them don't exercise discretion. They say, well, I got to treat everybody the same. And you would believe the number of arguments I get into with prosecutors when I say, look, man, you know my guy didn't do anything wrong. Yes, I know, but I say, well, why don't you just exercise your discretion? Sorry, I'm not going to do that. This is really why we need jury nullification. This is why...
Uh-oh, look out. We're getting into it now.
This is why the defense attorney needs to be able to stand in front of the jury, which we can't do today and do this, but I need to be able to stand in front of the jury and say, look, ladies and gentlemen, even though the state or the government has proven that the defendant violated the law, you guys have the power to judge the law, not just the facts,
Right,
but
the
you
law.
can judge the law and say, in this circumstance, under these facts, we're going to give him a pass. And that's why. That's why we need jury nullification, because we can't, look, we try hard to get the right rules, right? But there's always a circumstance that's outside the right rules. And when you take away jury nullification, now people can slip through the cracks and be prosecuted when they really shouldn't be, or be convicted when they really shouldn't be.
I know you're going to have questions about jury nullification. We're going to come back and have an entire discussion with Marc about that because I think it is a fascinating topic that deserves some real discussion.
Yeah, it really does.
So, Marc, I appreciate that. I appreciate the discussion of, as a bystander, do I have a duty morally versus legally, and do I have an obligation, and can I, as long as I, once again, here's the word, act reasonably, depending on my state laws, is what I'm hearing. So you got to check your state statutes, because if it's an alter ego statute that I stand in their shoes, that's a big difference than if what I reasonably perceive as a reasonable person.
My 2 cents here, act out of love. Act with good faith, try to do the right thing. For the most part, you're going to be okay.
There it is. I think that's the great advice. Marc, really, I appreciate the time.
Okay, thanks for having me.